Hello, welcome to Pressure Point. I'm your co-host for this program. My name is Valerie Dudoward.
And I'm the other co-host, Brad Newcombe, and I'm pleased to welcome Evan Adams, who is a Vancouver playwright, screenwriter, actor, and in the summer of 1997 is going to be starring in a film called So That's What It Means to Say Phoenix, Arizona, as well as one that he wrote himself, Snapshots. So it's a pleasure to welcome you, Evan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great.
Something that has really touched my curiosity is actually the name of the program, this program, New Values, New Waves, Old Values, that you chose. What does that come from?
Well, New Waves, Old Values is the logo on a poster that I did about 10 years ago for the National Native Role Model Program. When I met with the founders of the poster program, and they wanted to start a national poster campaign that would circulate amongst Native people and for Native youth, so that they would have positive images of Native people for a change. They spoke to me and they thought, he's really young, he's really hip, but he comes from the land, he comes from a community, a reserve, and he's family oriented. So they decided on this New Waves, Old Values, and at the time I didn't really know what it meant. I just said, yeah, sure, I'll pose for a picture and you can put whatever you like on it. But now it means much more to me than that.
Does it ever seem like a burden of any kind to be viewed so much by so many people as somebody who is a role model to Aboriginal youth and other people as well?
That's a good question, because I think for a few years I was really uncomfortable being in the public eye. In a way I still am. I think that there are other people who are better role models than I am. I don't think that actors are better role models than, say, an elder or a housewife or a mother or someone who drives a bus. And so sometimes I object to the fact that sports figures and actors are the people that we aspire to be, when in fact they're not the ones who create good people or good homes or good communities. But also part of it was that I was also really young, and being a teenager with the National Native Role Model Program, and we had rules like it wasn't really great for me to be seen in public drinking a beer or swearing or being angry, or I always had to be the nice boy. And luckily I'm usually a nice person, and it wasn't like I was out ballyhooing and yelling and all that stuff, anything like that. But I certainly felt like I was being scrutinized no matter where I was, if I was in a drugstore, but especially when I was around Native people and I might encounter them. I felt like I had to be presentable at all times.
I'm interested, Evan, in how you got started in acting.
Well, I was a pre-med student. I was doing a biochemistry degree at McGill University in Montreal. I was 17, and I found university really quite uninteresting, and I wanted to try something new. And all through my growing up years, I always felt extremely awkward. I think a lot of us feel that way, but I felt particularly so. I had no idea how to behave when I was around people. So I decided I would take an acting course. So I went to sign up, and before I could sign up, a woman from across the street, across from this acting school, came out of her office, and she came up to me and she said, "Are you an actor?" And I said, yeah, I lied to her.
Well, you were acting in that moment.
And she said, "Would you come for an audition tomorrow?" And I said, "Tomorrow?" I was supposed to be crossbreeding some fruit flies or something ridiculous. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come." I skipped class, which was terrible. But I landed this film role, and I went from being a really invisible student on a enormous campus to starring in a movie, which was called Toby McTeague, and making a lot of money and just working. And in acting, once you get one job, it's much easier to get another one. And so I kept working, and here I am 12 years later.
And you've been working, ever since. Now, but you've also you've grown in many directions. I mean, you've done dance and also both playwright and screenwriting.
That's right.
So now, how did that happen? That sort of movement from acting into writing? Was it a lack of good parts or visions or what?
Well, there were a couple of things. One of them is that as an actor, you aren't necessarily using your brain a lot. Or at least I found. Playing a young person, I was 18, I was playing very often 14, 15. I wasn't being challenged a lot. So I wanted to use this a little bit, and so I started to write. Part of the reason I also wanted to write was that there were no roles for me that were really very interesting. I very often played tonto roles where I was the sidekick to the protagonist, and I would say things like, "We're going to get in trouble," and that kind of, brainless stuff. And I wanted something a little more challenging, and thus I started to write. I quickly moved into the theater, which is where I think, which is the kind of acting that I preferred. I think it's harder to work in the theater than it is in front of the camera. So I started to write for the stage, and after about 5 years of doing that, I started to write for the screen, and so for about 6 years now, I've been writing for the screen.
And then that's a worthwhile process for you?
I really like it. When you write for the screen, you're dealing with huge numbers of characters, which is impossible to do in the theater because of casting. If you're hiring 20 actors to work for several weeks on a theater production, your chance of getting your money back is quite small. For film, you can shoot in lots of different locations with lots of different characters who appear just for a brief time. And it was also a genre that was more familiar to me. I didn't grow up seeing the theater. I did grow up seeing television.
Right.
So it was easier for me to assimilate that visual language.
Can you say a little bit about Snapshots, the
Sure.
film that you're starring in and that you wrote as well?
Yeah. Snapshots is a script that I've been working on for 7 years. It started off as my labor of love and my very first screenplay. It's taken a really long time to develop because it's got some really enormous themes in it. It's about love, and it's about death and dying. Kind of in a couple of sentences, it's two parallel stories of two families, each family having a member of the family who's dying. So it's about how one family falls apart in the midst of trying to help one of them die, and the other family maybe is going to survive with a little bit of help from the other family, maybe not. That's the crux of it. So it's very mythic in its scope. It's got lots of native images from my home, Sliammon. It has very many strong native women, and these were all things that I really wanted to see. Native people in film very often were secondary to a white protagonist. Very often our sensibilities around myth and story and character are ignored. Very often Native women are just not present in screenplays. We never see their stories. We never see what they're thinking or how they might speak for themselves if they were given an opportunity. So these were some of the things that I wanted to capture in writing the screenplay. And lo and behold, I got a producer. It got optioned. We got some development money.
Which I think, it sounds easy, but people need to know that is an amazing feat.
It's
that is
very
incredible.
hard.
In this day and age, in this time, to be able to raise the money to produce the film is, congratulations.
Very difficult.
It is not easy.
I find what you're saying about the invisibility of Aboriginal women in film to really strike home for me. And earlier, you also said something really provocative about before the poster campaign that you had done, which is also the title of our show, that so many Aboriginal young people did not have role models from their own community who were very much in the public eye.
That's right.
Who were your role models? Where does this come from? Where does all of this come from? And your perceptions about the strength of women in the Aboriginal communities.
Okay. Well, I grew up with 4 sisters and my mother, and a very strong father figure as well. My father's really quite a brilliant man. He wasn't always present, and mostly I grew up with women. I grew up on a reserve, and I think in our traditional communities, the women are very much a very vivid force, and I was very aware of them. And with my writing, I really wanted to capture, to pay homage to them, to the fact that so many Native women deserved better lives and didn't get them. And that here I was, a young man, growing up in the 60s and the 70s, with no role models in sight. I never saw myself on television, or I never saw myself in the theater. I never read about stories like mine in books. And I wanted to change that as I got a little bit older. And I thought, I come from a place with so many brilliant stories, how could I not write them down? So I arrive in this scene where a first-person testimonial, our history written by us, has not been put down, and so I can start to do that. So, lucky me, I get to be part of a real awakening. Now, the poster, as little as 10 years ago, Native people had virtually no images of themselves, positive or, well, actually, there were lots of negative images of Native people. Right. The dying noble savage, the fact that our culture was supposedly dying out.
Especially the Hollywood images.
Oh, and the Hollywood,
yeah.
ridiculous.
Which is such a powerful image, too. I mean, it really is, isn't it? Yeah. Because that impacts everybody.
That's right. And that's an extension of some literary imagery that was set up a long time ago. So we have all of these, and I call them fantasies, because they're fantasies of who we are as Native people. The stoic, noble savage, or they're just fantasies, and there's a place for fantasy. But in today's world, there's got to be a chance for us to speak for ourselves, and I feel really lucky that I'm going to be working on 2 projects this summer that, to me, are really very vivid pictures of where I come from.
You said as little as 10 years ago, there were not a lot of positive role models and images for First Nations people. Can you explain what has prompted some of the change in 10 years? I mean, of course, there's a long way to go in terms of better representation, more representation, but still, there has been a shift.
Yes.
How did we get to this point?
Well, I think there are probably some people who can answer this better than I can, but I will attempt to anyway.
Okay.
I think part of it is that we've just reached a critical mass. There are just a significant number of us now. Our populations were in decline for a very long time, and only as recently as 1900 did our population start to build somewhat. Even in my parents' generation, my mother lost her father to tuberculosis. My father lost both his parents to tuberculosis. And this was in the 40s. So there was still a huge amount of death and dying, a huge amount of cultural loss happening as little as 50 years ago now. So now I'm in this new generation. I'm in my 30s. I come from parents who had their entire world destroyed all around them, quite literally, and they tried to raise a son who could make it in this new world. I knew this when I was growing up. I knew that I had a chance and that I would try and make a difference. And I call it the Great Red Hope Syndrome. Any young person, any young Native person who's got half a brain and who's got a little bit of promise, everybody says, there is so much to do. You've got to make it. You've got to succeed. Go and do something, anything, and make the world a better place. And that's a lot of pressure. And certainly when I was 17, 18, and I was joining the role model program, and I was in university, and in university there were no Native students whatsoever at all 10 years ago. The pressure was really great.
Certainly not at McGill.
Oh, at McGill, I didn't see anyone identifiably Native. I was only there for a year before I left and went to make this film. But so I come back here, and I want to work just for myself. I decide, okay, I can't bear this pressure. I'd been scrutinized since I was a little boy, and John Kimbell makes this very vivid description. He says, when I was growing up on my reserve, I was like a dog who could sing Chopin. People would look at me and say, a Native person who can do well in school, who speaks English really well, someone who's adjusting and integrating. Weird. And the newspapers were following me around school when I was just like 6, 7, 8 years old because I had an A average, and they said, oh, how anomalous. So when I was in university, the pressure was a little too much, and I decided I would pursue my own thing, which was acting, and I was given a chance to do that. And 12 years later, I'm here now,
and you've done really, really well. I mean, television, movies, plays, awards, all kinds of things, and which is great. I mean, 2 of the television things that you've done, one won an Emmy, and
that's right.
one was nominated for an Emmy.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, that's better than average for sure. I mean, that's terrific.
Yeah, I've been very lucky.
Which leads to one of the things we talked about, is that you now are sort of moving away from that direction after making it and having lots of talent and gifts to study pre-medicine at UBC.
That's right. That's right.
So my question has to be, why? I mean, I think the other sounds just great. I mean, how could you walk away from that, Evan? I mean, it looks like it's got glamour and fun and fame, money.
I I've been asked this a lot of times. People are saying, "Why are you leaving? You've worked so hard," and I have worked very hard to get where I am in the arts. And they said, "Well, why are you leaving that to go into pre-med? You've got years in front of you of medical school and your residency, and there's so much more to be done in the areas of health. Why are you leaving?" And a couple of years ago, I thought, well, will I be happy if I die tomorrow and all I've done is be an actor? Will I be happy? And I thought, no, I won't be. My original dream, the dream that I've always had since I was a little boy, was to be a physician. I had no idea back then that a Native person could be a physician. I actually met a woman who was an actor when I was in my teens, a Native woman who was an actress. And she was a role model for me, Margot Kane. I had no idea up until that point that a Native person was allowed to act. And I guess it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I had a couple of examples of Native people who had become physicians.
And there really haven't been many Aboriginal
No.
people in Canada, certainly, who have gone into the medical field.
There
in
are
that
about
sense.
50. There are about 50 people
Really?
with some Aboriginal blood who are self-identified as, as First Nations people.
And one of the things that you say that really strikes me as interesting is that, and until I hear you say that, it strikes me as, I mean, because there were you didn't meet Native physicians or Native actors, then the idea wasn't there that you could be that.
No, there
That
wasn't.
we
No,
need
not
to
at
we
all.
need to see, or it's certainly helpful
Mhm.
to see someone who sort of lays the trail.
Virtually every image I saw when I was growing up was about the down-and-out Native Indian or the dying noble breed. And that was all. That was the only press that we ever got. And it's really hard to break that because when you're young, you believe.
And
You believe the news.
And often a culture that's presented that was glorious in its past, but that isn't living now.
That's right. And we're just, the last dregs of something that was once great.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, that, given that at any time, people who are working in the professional field of acting,
Mhm.
anywhere from 1 to 1% are actually working or gainfully employed in their
That's
field.
right. That's right.
And you have joined that very elite
Mhm.
crowd.
Yeah. I was working.
Courage of your convictions here.
Oh.
Yeah, to be able to
Yes.
go away.
Well, to leave. I really thought that when I made my decision to return to school, that I was going to give up acting completely. And it kind of broke my heart to do that. It felt like I was cutting off my arm to save the rest of me. I felt a very strong need to go into health. There was so much to be done. And also, I'm a little bit older now, and so I'm feeling my sense of responsibility to the community that I come from, and the whole First Nations community in Canada at large. I felt that responsibility coming upon me. So I decided I would go. And the glamorous part of film means nothing to me at all. I would rather be invisible. I don't ever want to be a famous person, or none of that really interests me. The money has never been a big deal, and I don't know why that is. I mean, I certainly enjoy making a film actor's wages. I mean,
Right,
that's wonderful.
nice.
But I
I'm
could
sure.
also turn around and say, well, I can live as a poor student. That would be fine. That would be great.
Well, you mentioned student, because I know you're at UBC
Mhm.
in pre-medicine, and one of the things at UBC, they have a First Nations House of Learning, and have
That's
done
right.
several of the faculties have areas, that present First Nations perspectives and so on, which again is a tremendous shift, from 10, 15, certainly 20 years ago would have been unheard of. Say a little bit about the role of First Nations House of Learning and that kind of perspective in studies at university.
It's so important for us to have a place that Native students feel welcome. For many of us, we have had to give up everything that we know in order to go to university. We give up our families, we give up our language, we give up the place that we were born into, our positions in our communities and our societies, in order to go to be a working dog in the university. And I swear, I have never been treated like less of a human being than in school. I've never been more patronized, I've never been more abused or ignored as I have been in university. And I knew that. I mean, I knew that from when I was in university many, many years ago. And I thought, well, I'm going to go back into the lion's den just because I need that piece of paper that tells me that I can do good things. And to have the First Nations House of Learning there, that I could see people like me who come from the same backgrounds, who have families just like mine, it's invaluable. In fact, can't imagine how it would be if that wasn't the case. Now, the medical school, which is a which is a very fine medical school, doesn't have a position for a Native student, because some of the medical schools in Canada have a specific position for an Aboriginal student to try and rectify the fact that there are no Aboriginal doctors, or virtually none. And so UBC is debating that now, and it seems there are a lot of people saying, well, can we take this equal opportunity stuff, and should we be admitting Native students who have lower grade point averages than other medical student applicants, and that kind of thing. And that debate is on at the moment. And
it's raging across the United States as well.
That's right.
Raging, and it continues to rage in California and other states that are looking at abandoning those types of programs.
That's right.
You mentioned that there's a lot to do, I mean, in terms of areas of health. So obviously your vision is to, of course, graduate, be a doctor. And is that to work in First Nations communities? I know you've done a lot of AIDS education. Maybe you could say a little bit about the needs that you see in First Nations communities.
When I was working with the Role Model Program, I got this incredible opportunity to visit virtually every reserve in the country. It was really wonderful. A really good education for a young person like me. I had no idea what I was doing out there, but I was out there in the snow or in the mud or in this very hip mod reserves, talking to everybody across the country. And you know what I found? Was that everybody's doing pretty well. Everybody's doing pretty well. I would go to places, kids were happy. I would go to places, there were lots of really good things happening in the band office and in the nurse's station. And I felt hope. And
the beautiful, actually, artwork and gift that you're wearing, can you tell us about that? 'Cause that's related to what happens to you, I know.
Yes.
A lot.
Well, when I was out in communities, I felt like I felt a very strong need to give back. That I wasn't just going to be a boy who went on the reserve and smiled at people and signed a few autographs and sat down and had dinner with them. I wanted to make a difference, and so I tried to brief myself on as many health issues as I could around addictions, particularly around AIDS, because when I was going out on the reserves, AIDS was very much and still is threatening First Nations communities. So in one place where I was speaking, they had a death due to AIDS, and a woman came up to me and she just pinned this on me, and she said, "This is for you," and she just turned and she left, and it's the most beautiful thing.
Herself, or
I didn't know who she was.
Just spoke that.
She just gave me this beautiful thing, and I wear it all the time. And this, and I have another piece which was given to me by some prisoners, some women prisoners from Saskatchewan, are two of my favorite, because they really speak of the people that I come from. And I could be one of them. I could be dead of AIDS. I could be someone in the prison system. I certainly don't feel like I'm removed from the people that I come from. Yeah.
And I suppose that's one of the things that motivates you from wanting to give back?
Oh, very much, very much. I'm very much from a community and a family, and I need to go back there. And it took me years to believe that I could go back. My father always said, when I was a little boy, he said, I'm not growing you up to be a foot soldier in the white man's army, that I was to never leave and go off and live in the city and just work for some company. That if that was the case, then all was for nothing. And when I was in my teens, I was sure that I couldn't go back. I was just sure I couldn't, that I wanted to be in a city. I wanted to live on my own. I didn't want to go back and live on a squalid reserve that was dangerous for young people. I mean, I had this vision of the reserve as a place that was going to be really difficult to rehabilitate, and what was I going to do? I was just a teenage boy. Now that I'm a little bit older, I know that a reserve is a wonderful place, and that there's a place for family. And I have 3 sisters and a brother there, and 14 nephews and nieces, my parents, and lots of elders there.
What do they think of your journey and where you're at, and your decision regarding going back to school, and just your role as a person in the bigger world and in the Aboriginal world?
I really don't know. My parents are not, and my family are not very vociferous. Like, it's not as if they turn around and say, "Wow, you were doing great things." It's not that. That's not the way.
I don't think a lot of families are.
No,
yeah.
No, and that's the way I prefer it as well. Because to me, they're the ones who are working so very hard. They're the ones who are raising families and keeping the community together. I'm just, one of their sons who's gone off on this great little journey, who's going to learn some things and hopefully bring it home again. I haven't brought it home again. I'm still in many ways at the beginning of my career, and so I think it's great that you've asked me here. But there are still a great many things to be done, and I would say that in 20 years, I think I'll have some really solid opinions and some really solid things that I can say, look what I did, and it was wonderful.
But of course, I guess that's the way it is for all of us, isn't it? There's always something new to learn.
Oh yeah.
Always something new to learn. But you've made some pretty big decisions. University, acting, writing. Now back to university.
They didn't feel like big decisions at the time. They certainly weren't decisions I made for other people. They were decisions I made for myself. And it was scary to decide to leave the acting world and to go back and be this working dog in school. But it was...
I like the visuals around that.
Oh.
When you described...
It's really like that. It's so true. It's so like that.
But it's been great to talk to you, Evan, and I wish you all the best in everything you do. I mean, filming 2 movies this summer, one of them that you wrote,
yes,
and then on with more medical studies. So good to have you here with us.
Thank you very much.
Very good. And good to meet you at long last.
Yes.
Yeah. And always good to see you, because we've known each other for some time.
That's right.
Yeah. I've been talking with Evan Adams, and we've been talking about his career as a screenwriter, playwright, actor, and now medical student. You've been watching Pressure Point. Thanks for joining Val Dudoward and me, Brad Newcombe. Bye.